The first time my boss called me worthless trash, it wasn't in a hallway or behind a closed door. It was in a Monday morning team meeting on a conference room speaker with 12 people staring at me like they'd just been told to stay perfectly still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my laptop shut. I didn't storm out. I just looked at the wall clock, then at the meeting invite on my screen, and I memorized the exact sentence he used, because something in me knew I was going to need it later. I'm a mid-level analyst at a mid-sized company that likes to pretend it's a family on LinkedIn and a pressure cooker everywhere else. We're the kind of place that sends out mental health emails at 9 a.m. and then books a quick sync at 9:15 to ask why you aren't answering Slack fast enough. My boss, let's call him Greg, ran our department like a personal kingdom. He wasn't a screamer all the time. That was part of why he got away with it. Most days he was calm and sarcastic, the kind of guy who would smile while he cut you down. He'd say things like, not to be harsh, but are you sure you're in the right job? Or, I need adults on this project. And if you reacted, he'd tilt his head and act like you were unstable. I'd been on his team for a little over a year, long enough to learn his patterns, long enough to know who he protected and who he punished, long enough to understand that if you wanted to survive, you stayed useful, stayed quiet, and stayed out of his line of fire. The meeting was on a Monday at 10:20 a.m. It was labeled Weekly Pipeline Review, and it was one of those recurring invites that never went away, like mold. Hybrid meeting, a few people in the conference room, a few dialed in. Greg loved those meetings because he could perform. He got to look like a leader in front of his boss, our director, who sometimes dropped in for the first 10 minutes before disappearing. That day, the director was actually there. Camera on, quiet, watching. I was presenting a simple status update. Not a big pitch, not a risky opinion, a basic walkthrough of where the numbers were, what was blocked, and what needed decisions. I had the spreadsheet open, the deck minimized, the Jira board off to the side. I'd done the work. I'd triple-checked the figures on Sunday night because I'd learned the hard way what happened when Greg smelled weakness. About 6 minutes in, I got to a slide that showed a mismatch between two internal reports. It wasn't dramatic. It was a few $1,000s off. But in our world, mismatches are like blood in the water. I said very calmly, these two sources aren't aligning, so I flagged it. I'm waiting on confirmation from finance before we finalize. That should have been the end of it. Greg leaned forward in his chair. You could hear the chair creak through the speaker. Then he made this small laugh, like he couldn't believe I'd just spoken. Why would you even bring that up in this meeting? He said. I blinked once. Because it affects the total, and he cut me off. No, stop. You're doing that thing again where you waste everyone's time. The room got quiet in that way that doesn't feel like silence. It feels like the air has been replaced with something heavier. I tried to keep it professional. I'm not trying to derail anything. I just want to make sure... Greg's voice sharpened. You know what you are? You're worthless trash. He didn't say it like a joke. He didn't say it like an exaggeration. He said it like he'd been holding it in, waiting for the moment it would land in front of an audience. There was a tiny delay after he said it, like the software didn't know what to do with that sentence, like the speaker had to process it before releasing it into the room. Someone in the conference room made a sound, like a breath caught in their throat. On the call, one person's camera flickered off. Another person stared straight down at their keyboard, like their keys suddenly became interesting. Greg didn't stop there. He looked around the room and then, deliberately, turned toward the director's camera. I'm serious, he said. I don't know how many times I have to say this. He's not adding value. He's just noise. That's when I felt it. My face getting hot, my ears ringing, my heartbeat trying to climb out of my chest. And I had the most childish impulse imaginable, to defend myself, to list every deliverable, every late night, every time I'd fixed a mistake that would have embarrassed him, to point at the screen and say, I did all of this, and you know it, but I didn't. because the second you argue in a room like that, the story becomes about your reaction, not what was done to you. Greg thrived on that. He loved dragging people into the mud because he knew he could stand there and call it conflict resolution. So I did something that surprised even me. I said evenly, "Okay," just one word, not sarcastic, not defeated, just flat. Greg narrowed his eyes like he was trying to decide whether I was mocking him. "Okay," he repeated, like it offended him that I wasn't crying. I clicked to the next slide. "Moving on," I said, and I kept presenting. My hands were steady on the mouse, but my fingers felt numb. I could hear my own voice, and it didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone doing a good impression of a calm person while their insides were turning. The director didn't interrupt, didn't correct him, didn't say, "That's inappropriate." She just watched, expression unreadable like she was taking inventory. Greg spent the next 10 minutes nitpicking everything I said, but the moment had already happened. You can't unhear someone call you trash in front of a room. You can't unfeel the shift after that. Like the team silently decided what they were willing to tolerate to keep their jobs. When the meeting ended, people filed out of the conference room too quickly. The ones on Zoom clicked off without goodbye. My Slack lit up with notifications that weren't messages yet, just the little typing bubbles, popping on and off as people tried to decide whether they wanted to get involved in my life. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at my screen. My reflection in the black monitor looked normal. That was the weird part. My face didn't look like something had just happened to me. Then my phone vibrated with a calendar alert. 1-1 with Greg, 10:30 a.m. He'd scheduled it weeks ago, a recurring check-in, like he hadn't just tried to break me in front of everyone. I stood up. My legs felt too light, like I might float. I walked to the bathroom, locked myself into a stall, and sat on the closed lid, because my hands had started shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. I didn't cry. Not yet. What I felt was worse. I felt stupid. Not for presenting. Not for being in that meeting. For believing, on some level, that if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down enough, stayed valuable enough, this kind of thing wouldn't happen to me. In the stall, with the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, I opened my notes app and typed one line. Monday, 10:07 a.m. Weekly Pipeline Review. Greg, you're worthless trash. Witnesses, names. Director present. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I added a second line. Do not talk to him alone without a record. And that was the moment I stopped thinking of Greg as a difficult boss. I started thinking of him as a risk. I went to the 1-1, not because I wanted to hear what he had to say, but because I needed to see how far he was willing to push when there were no witnesses. Greg was already in the small glass meeting room when I arrived. Door closed, laptop open. He didn't look angry. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked satisfied, like someone who just tested a boundary and liked how little resistance he felt. Have a seat, he said without looking up. I sat. I placed my notebook on the table. I didn't open it. He sighed dramatically. So, that meeting. I waited. He leaned back. You put me in a bad position today. That word again. Me. Not his language. Not his behavior. Me. I was presenting the data, I said. Neutral. Careful. Greg smiled thinly. You were showing uncertainty. In front of leadership. That's not what I need from you. I nodded once. I flagged a discrepancy. And that, he said, pointing at me, is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't think strategically. You think like an individual contributor who doesn't understand optics. There it was, the reframing, the attempt to turn a public insult into coaching. He continued, voice low. You embarrassed me, and when you do that, you make yourself a problem. I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my hands flat on the table. You called me worthless trash, I said. He waved a hand. Don't be dramatic. Everyone knows I exaggerate. It wasn't an exaggeration, I said. It was a statement. For the first time, he looked directly at me. Listen, he said, tone hardening. I'm trying to help you. But if you can't handle direct feedback, maybe this isn't the right environment for you. There it was, the implied threat. Quit quietly or stay and bleed. I took a breath. If you have feedback, I'm open to it. But I'm not okay with being spoken to like that. His smile vanished. This is exactly the problem, he said. You're too sensitive. And honestly, you should be grateful I haven't escalated this. I didn't respond. He leaned forward. You want to survive here? Stop documenting everything. Stop acting like you're building a case. People notice that. My stomach dropped, just slightly. He was guessing, but the fact that he guessed meant something. I don't know what you mean, I said. He stared at me for a long second. Then he leaned back again, satisfied. Good, he said, because HR doesn't need to be involved in every hurt feeling. The meeting ended with him standing up first. Power move. As he walked out, he added casually, Oh, and next time you derail my meeting like that, we'll have a different conversation. When I got back to my desk, the atmosphere had changed. No one said anything directly, but people weren't looking at me the same way. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Slack replies took longer. A few teammates sent vague messages like, Hey man, rough meeting, and then disappeared when I replied. I understood why. In workplaces like this, proximity to conflict is dangerous. You either distance yourself from it, or it pulls you under too. What bothered me wasn't the silence. It was the emails. That afternoon, I got one from Greg, CCing no one. Following up on our discussion, it read, I need you to be more mindful of how your comments land in group settings. Please run sensitive concerns by me before raising them publicly. Translation. Don't leave a paper trail that isn't mine. I replied with one sentence. Can you clarify what qualifies as sensitive concerns so I can align? He didn't respond. Instead, 30 minutes later, I got a meeting invite for later that week. Title, Performance Alignment. HR included. That was just the beginning. By Tuesday morning, my access to one of our reporting dashboards was gone. Not blocked completely, just temporarily unavailable. When I asked IT, they said it was per management request. Greg hadn't said a word to me about it. At lunch, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel, longer than I want to admit. Quitting crossed my mind, not dramatically, quietly, calculating rent, insurance, the job market, how long I could float before panic set in. Then something clicked. This wasn't random, and it wasn't emotional. It was retaliation. 2 weeks earlier, I'd flagged a compliance issue in our workflow. Nothing explosive. Just a note that one of our processes didn't align with updated policy and could expose us if audited. Greg had brushed it off, told me to stop overthinking. I hadn't pushed, but I had documented it, and now suddenly I was noise. Back at my desk, I opened my notes app again. I added timestamps, emails, subject lines, access changes, exact phrases, not interpretations, facts. I forwarded Greg's email to my personal account. I downloaded my performance reviews. Solid, consistent, no red flags. I saved meeting invites. I wrote everything like someone else might have to read it one day, because they might. By Wednesday, HR reached out to confirm the performance alignment meeting. The message was polite, neutral, vague. I replied professionally. I attached nothing. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that made my chest feel lighter and heavier at the same time. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to survive with my integrity intact. And Greg still thought this was a power game. He had no idea what he'd already stepped into. The HR meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Performance alignment, 30 minutes. Greg, me, and an HR business partner I'd never spoken to before. That alone told me something. HR doesn't invent new meeting titles for fun, and they don't loop in someone outside your reporting chain unless there's already a narrative forming. I spent the morning doing my job like nothing was wrong. Same emails, same tone, same delivery. If anyone was watching, I wanted them to see consistency, not panic. At 1:57, I walked into the conference room. Greg was already there, seated closest to the door. HR sat across from him, laptop open, posture careful. She smiled at me the way people do when they're trying to look neutral and kind at the same time. "Thanks for joining," she said. "This is meant to be a constructive conversation." Greg nodded, didn't look at me. She started with the usual script. "We want to make sure expectations are clear on both sides." Greg jumped in immediately. "I'll be direct. There's been a pattern of behavior that's becoming disruptive." I waited. "He challenges decisions in public forums," Greg continued, "creates doubt, and frankly, it's impacting team morale." HR typed. Slowly. I took a breath. "Can you give a specific example?" Greg smiled, like he'd been waiting for that. "Monday, the pipeline meeting." "Specifically?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second, raising discrepancies that weren't ready. HR looked up. "Was the data inaccurate?" "No," Greg said, "but it wasn't finalized." "So it was accurate," she clarified. Greg shifted in his chair. "That's not the point," I nodded. "I flagged it because it affects totals. I also followed established reporting guidelines." HR typed again. Then I said it. "I'd also like to address the language used toward me in that meeting." The room went very still. Greg exhaled sharply. "We're not doing this." "I think we are," I said evenly. "You called me worthless trash in front of the team." HR's hands stopped moving. She looked at Greg. "Did that happen?" Greg laughed once, too loud. "Come on, that's a dramatic interpretation." "It's not an interpretation," I said. "It's a quote." HR turned to me. "Do you have witnesses?" "Yes," I said, and the director was present. That landed. HR's posture changed. Subtle but real. She sat a little straighter, closed her laptop halfway. "Okay," she said carefully. "Thank you for sharing that." Greg leaned forward. "This is exactly what I mean. He's making this adversarial." "I'm responding to what happened," I said, "and I'd like to understand how being spoken to that way aligns with company policy." No one spoke for a moment. HR cleared her throat. "I'm going to pause us here. I'll need to follow up on some of this." Greg's jaw tightened. "So now I'm being investigated?" "This isn't an investigation," she said quickly. "It's a review." I knew that word. Review. The kind that decides which direction things are going to move. The meeting ended early. Greg stood up first, again. But this time, he didn't have anything to say on his way out. That afternoon, I got an email from HR asking for any additional context I felt was relevant. That's when the final piece clicked into place. 2 weeks before the meeting where Greg snapped, I'd send an internal message flagging a billing workflow that didn't align with updated compliance guidance. Not loudly, not accusatory, just a note asking for confirmation before we finalized numbers. Greg had replied, "Not an issue. We'll handle it." He never did, and I had proof. I pulled the email, then another, then a calendar invite where the issue was discussed and deferred, then a message from finance asking why numbers had changed after approval. It wasn't just a discrepancy, it was exposure. If audited, the trail led straight to Greg, and I was the only one who'd raised a hand. That night, I didn't sleep much. I organized everything into a timeline. Dates, times, direct quotes, access changes, the moment my dashboard permissions were altered, the performance alignment invite, the exact phrasing of Greg's follow-up email. I didn't editorialize. I didn't vent. I wrote it like someone preparing evidence, not revenge. The next morning, HR emailed again. This time, she CC'd legal. She asked if I was available for a separate conversation. I replied, yes. An hour later, my calendar changed. Greg's meetings disappeared, not all of them, just the important ones. Then my access was restored, quietly, without explanation. By Friday afternoon, legal asked me to place a hold on any documents related to the workflow in question. Standard language. Formal tone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about my feelings. This was about risk, and Greg wasn't managing it anymore. He was the risk. When I logged off that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker I barely talked to. "Hey, random question. Are they asking you stuff too?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Yes." That was when I understood something that made my hands stop shaking for the first time all week. I wasn't alone, and Greg wasn't in control of the story anymore. He just didn't know it yet. By Monday morning, the building felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just restrained. Like everyone was waiting for a sound they didn't want to be the first to make. Greg didn't come in at his usual time. That alone would have been gossip-worthy. He was obsessive about appearances. First one in, last one out. Coffee cup visible. Door open just enough to look accessible. When 9:30 came and his office was still dark, people noticed. At 9:47, an email went out from legal. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accusatory. It was worse than that. Effective immediately, please preserve all documents, messages, and records related to Project Atlas and associated billing workflows. This includes emails, chat logs, drafts, and personal notes. Litigation hold. No names mentioned. But everyone knew. 10 minutes later, my calendar updated again. A new meeting. Fact-finding interview. Legal, HR. 30 minutes. Greg was not included. I walked into the room with my notes printed this time. Not because they asked for them, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. The legal counsel introduced herself, explained the process, emphasized confidentiality. Her tone was calm, practiced, and completely uninterested in office politics. They asked me to walk through the timeline. I did. I talked about the discrepancy, the email, the deferral, the meeting, the insult, the access changes, the follow-up email from Greg. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't guess at motives. I let the sequence speak for itself. They asked clarifying questions, specific ones. Who else was present? When did you lose access? Did anyone advise you not to escalate? I answered all of it. At one point, the lawyer nodded slowly and said, "Thank you. That's very clear." That sentence felt heavier than any apology. By the time I got back to my desk, half the floor knew something was happening, not because anyone said anything outright, but because people started getting pulled into rooms one by one. Quiet invitations, closed doors, long gaps. Greg finally arrived around noon. He walked fast, didn't greet anyone, went straight to his office. 20 minutes later, 2 people from HR walked in behind him and closed the door. They didn't come out for an hour. Slack went strangely still. No jokes, no gifts, just work messages, stripped of personality. People avoided eye contact like it was contagious. When the door finally opened, Greg stepped out looking smaller, not defeated, not yet, but tight, controlled, like someone holding in anger because they knew the walls had ears. He didn't look at me. That afternoon, an email went out from HR. Greg will be out of the office for the remainder of the week. No explanation, no signature flourish. Out of the office. An hour later, IT reset admin permissions across the department. Greg's name disappeared from approval chains. A temporary reporting structure was announced. The director would be overseeing things during the transition. People started talking then. Quietly, carefully, in DMs that opened with, "This stays between us." One coworker told me they'd been asked about similar incidents. Another said legal wanted to know why Greg discouraged written communication. Someone else admitted they'd been told not to CC finance on certain reports. Patterns. By Wednesday, the narrative Greg had built for years about being direct, about high standards, about people who couldn't hack it, was collapsing under its own weight. He tried to reassert control, sent an email from his phone, not his laptop. "I'm still available for urgent questions." No one replied. That silence wasn't accidental. It was coordinated caution. Later that day, I was called back into legal. Shorter meeting, different tone. They thanked me for my cooperation, told me I'd done the right thing, said they'd be in touch if they needed anything else. Then they added one more thing. For now, please don't discuss this with anyone. I nodded. I hadn't been planning to. That evening I stayed late. Not to work, just to breathe in the quiet of a place that had stopped feeling hostile. As I shut down my computer, I noticed something small, but symbolic. My performance review folder had been accessed, not edited, viewed. By Thursday morning, Greg's badge didn't work. I saw it happen. He tried the door. Once, twice. Then stood there too long, pretending to check his phone. Security came over quietly. No scene. No raised voices. They walked him out a side exit. No one clapped. No one stared. We all just kept typing. The official announcement came the next day. Greg has separated from the company effective immediately. Separated. No farewell message. No transition plan. No glowing summary of contributions. Just a clean cut and a reminder about respectful workplace conduct, attached as a PDF. I read it twice. Then I closed it and went back to work. That afternoon, HR scheduled a meeting with me and the director. This time, there was no script. She apologized, directly, for what had happened, for not intervening sooner, for the position I'd been put in. The director told me my role would be shifting, new reporting line, more autonomy, a title adjustment that reflected the work I'd already been doing. It wasn't a victory lap, it was a correction. As I left the building that night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from a coworker. They thought you were gone, or broken. I stopped walking for a second before replying. I wasn't. And for the first time since that Monday morning meeting, I felt something close to calm. Not triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of watching consequences catch up to someone who thought they never would. The week after Greg was gone felt unreal in the quietest way possible. No announcements, no speeches, no awkward town hall where leadership tried to spin it into a learning moment, just absence. His name slowly disappeared from shared documents. His old calendar slots got reassigned. His office was cleaned out over a weekend, like he'd never really been there, and the world didn't end. That surprised me more than anything. On Monday, I met with the director again. No HR this time, no legal, just her, a glass of water, and a version of the conversation that should have happened months earlier. She didn't overdo it. She didn't dramatize. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from realizing a problem existed longer than anyone wanted to admit. You were right to raise what you raised, she said, both about the process and about how you were treated. I nodded. I wasn't there to be validated. I just wanted clarity. She explained what would change. My reporting line was permanent now. Different manager. Direct access when concerns touched compliance. A revised role description that matched the work I'd already been doing. Plus a title adjustment that made it official. Compensation review scheduled earlier than planned. None of it felt like a reward. It felt like alignment. Before the meeting ended, she said something that stuck with me. You didn't make this messy, she said. You made it visible. I walked back to my desk, lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The team was different too. People talked again, not loudly, not dramatically, just normally. Meetings stayed on track. Feedback was direct but respectful. Decisions were documented. CCs stopped being treated like acts of aggression. A few coworkers reached out privately over the next few days, some to thank me, some to apologize for staying quiet, some just to say, I'm glad you're still here. I didn't hold it against them. Fear is contagious. So is relief. HR followed up once more, formally, closed the loop, confirmed the outcome without details, reminded me of support resources and non-retaliation protections, which at that point felt unnecessary, but still mattered. Then it was over. No ongoing tension, no shadow meetings, no whispered warnings, just work. One afternoon, about a month later, I found myself sitting in the same conference room where it had all started. Same chair, same wall clock, Same speaker in the middle of the table. Different atmosphere. A junior analyst was presenting. She hesitated halfway through a slide and said, "I'm not fully confident in this number yet. I want to double check before we finalize." No one snapped at her. The manager nodded. "Good catch. Let's hold until it's confirmed." And they moved on. I sat there quietly, hands folded, and felt something settle. Not pride. Closure. I thought about that moment in the bathroom stall, my hands shaking, typing that first line into my notes app. At the time, it felt small, almost pathetic, like the only thing I could control in a situation designed to strip me of control. But it turned out to be enough. Greg never reached out. No apology. No explanation. No LinkedIn post about new beginnings. From what I heard, he left without severance. The investigation findings made that impossible. That wasn't satisfying. What was satisfying was knowing the outcome didn't depend on me being louder, meaner, or more ruthless. It depended on me being clear. There's a version of this story where I stormed out of the meeting, or quit dramatically, or fired off an email that made me feel powerful for 5 minutes and unemployed for 6 months. That version doesn't end well. This one did. Not because the system is perfect. It isn't. Not because justice always wins. It doesn't. But because sometimes, when you document instead of explode, when you stay grounded instead of reactive, when you treat abuse like a liability instead of a personal failure, the system has no choice but to respond. The last time I walked past Greg's old office, the door was open, empty, sunlight on bare carpet, and for the first time since he'd called me worthless trash, I realized something quietly, without drama or bitterness. He needed me to believe that to survive there. I never did, and in the end, I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth to be written down, clearly enough that it couldn't be ignored.